Speaking of grounding, Christiana asked, how many ground rods would you need? Should I put one where my main antenna is and one where the coax goes into the house?
Oh. So where do you live, Christiana?
Yeah,
M6, that's like a California thing.
California. I believe she's in California. I also have one of those MFJ window antenna panels that has the 4 SO230 and long wire posts plus a ground lug.
Okay.
So that's how her cables are getting into the house, is with the window panel. So
and Christiana, I didn't see anything about a tower. So you're kind of like me, you're tower inhibited. So your house or your dwelling should have a ground rod for the electrical service. Any other ham may tell you that you can't use that, and I will tell you that they not only are wrong, they are violating the National Electrical Code. They also are violating most engineering standards. And even if you look at the ARRL's grounding and bonding book, they also say that you should be at some point connected to that service ground as well. Now, do you need multiple ground rods at your house? Now, that's a good question. Wisconsin, we're going to delve a little bit into electrical stuff here, guys, so just kind of bear with me. Wisconsin says you have to have 2 grounding electrodes. A grounding electrode could be a ground rod, it could be a ground pipe, a ground ring, there's a ground plate. There's a lot of different things that constitute a grounding electrode. And the main reason is in the winter, the ground freezes 3-4 feet deep sometimes, and that frozen ground does not conduct well. Okay. We won't get into ground conductivity here too much because that would be a rant even I don't even want to go in. But you don't really need to have more than what you already have. Now, if you are ground rod deficient, let's just say because homes were built before certain standards were put in, a lot of times the electrical service just went to a copper water pipe going out to the water service, which is acceptable. You could ground to them. I think that's not the best because then you're grounding electrodes in the house. I do this. I have 2 ground rods per Wisconsin code. They have to be more than 8 feet apart in Wisconsin. So one is close to where my antennas come in, and I use that one for my shack, but it is connected to the one on the other side, well, not on the other side of the house, but just around the corner, which is the electrical service ground. Okay. So when you say how many you need to have whatever is code compliant for your area, but you don't need to have more. A lot of houses now, most houses now, have what's called IBT, which I can't remember. It's a bonding terminal. And this is like for communications equipment. So if you have phone, satellite, cable, all of those have to be bonded as well to that service. And it's a little box, and it is really just a cover with a little ground bar under it that they come into, and then there's a 1 ground lead that goes to the ground rod. And that in itself would generally be sufficient for you to ground your station to. You could run like a number 6 copper cable, bare copper, to that, connect to it, and then have a ground bar or a ground bus in your shack. And it doesn't have to be big or extravagant. It can be a piece of copper pipe with some pipe clamps. And I guess maybe we should talk about, one of these days, we should talk about that too. But that would be more than sufficient for grounding in a system. Like I said, lightning strikes, act of God. Sorry, it may work, it may not. Your result will vary.
And Christiana, she's from Oregon, Altamont, Oregon, near Klamath Falls, and she also said she doesn't have a tower, so tower's not really an issue.
We're not talking about ground rods for a tower. That's a separate thing. So realistically, if you got that little IBT out behind your house to the backside, that's probably all you would really need, as long as that's connected to the grounding electrode.
Some kind of grounding, yeah. Yeah, and one thing I was going to say, you mentioned grounding to the cold water pipe, and I think we need to start to be a little bit more careful about doing that. Older houses in older communities, that's going to be something that's going to work, because you've got a water lateral that probably goes out to the main, and that's all contiguous iron pipe, well, with lead sometimes too, lead soldered iron pipe. But yeah, I know. But because I just said lead soldered iron pipe, a lot of communities are replacing their water laterals with PEX, plastic piping, into the service, into the house. So if your community is in a lead lateral replacement program, or if you live in a newer subdivision, you probably have you either have PEX running into the house, or you're going to have PEX running into the house, because they're taking out those lead lead soldered iron pipes and replacing them with plastic piping. So it's not a sufficient ground point, or it won't be any much longer. So,
Michael, you say that like a local city politician who gets complaints all the time when they do, like, when they have to repave or redo a whole street, they do all the utilities under it. And
yes,
people have talked to you about that. Is that really the case?
It is the case. Our neighbor, actually, this was really eye-opening. Our neighbor across the street this summer had his lead lateral replaced, and I did not know the extent of what needs to be done until I saw firsthand this entire process of digging.
When they bring out an excavator, they start digging up the road.
Yeah, and it's plastic now. It's all plastic. So if you're in a new house, that's all plastic too. So
right. So they say that you should bond on the utility side of your water meter. Okay, so if you look somewhere in your house, in your basement, you have a water meter, and you would have to bond to that. Now, sometimes you can bond on, the customer side of it, or we would call that like the load side as an electrician, but you have to have a jumper, some sort of copper wire bonding the two, because the meter itself is not necessarily all metal all the way through. So, but then that pipe needs to go into the ground at least 10 feet horizontally, vertically, whatever, but it has to be 10 feet of metal, some sort of conductive metal, copper, iron, steel. So it's PEX or it's plastic, it ain't gonna work.
No,
at all.
No, it's not. KB9VBR antennas are simple, effective, and affordable VHF and UHF antennas for amateur radio, MERS, public safety, and GMRS. Made in the USA with quality parts. Get yours online at jpole-antenna.com.